In 2023, Central became the #1 restaurant in the world.
The world's best restaurant 2023 is Central!
But they did it a little bit differently, using bizarre and unknown Peruvian ingredients. And while they might have reached the pinnacle of fine dining, they're just getting started. This is a story about Peru, about innovation, and about how the world's #1 restaurant and the team that helped make it happen are sharing that story of Peru with the world. We're not only going to try the insane meal at Central, but we're also going to go behind the scenes, try out their newer restaurant Kjolle, and even get a hands-on demonstration of some of the groundbreaking research that they're doing. It's gonna be incredible. Inside this building is the future of Peruvian cuisine. And that might sound like a dramatic statement, but it's true. This is Casa Tupac, where all of their operations in Lima are housed. There's Central, the #1 restaurant in the world, started by Virgilio Martinez. Kjolle, the #16 restaurant in the world, started by Pia Leon. Displays highlighting Mater, which is the research arm for the organization, and Masi, the way to connect Mater's research to the world through experiences. We're going to be experiencing all of this today, starting off at Central, their flagship restaurant, which has one of the most unique menus anywhere in the world.
Central is defining a menu based on different elevations and altitudes and different ecosystems. It's like seeing our geography. You go from one ecosystem to the other one, starting from the ocean and then going up to the mountains to the extreme altitude and then going to the Amazon.
The experience actually starts outside, and we had the best guide to show us around, Malena, Virgilio's sister and the head of their research arm, Mater.
We wanted to create this landscape to receive you. As you come through Pedro de Osma, which is kind of noisy, then you are here in the peace and harmony of this garden with native species from Peru. You can find away manto, Peruvian cotton, pacay, which is ice cream bean, stuff that you also will see in the actual experience inside.
And right before the meal begins, you start off with a welcome drink in their garden as well. It's a beautiful way to ease into their world because they really want you to be fully immersed, but it also just gets you excited about the meal to come. Okay, before we dive into the food, this is actually a really special video for me because Central was actually my first ever fine dining restaurant 7 years ago. And it's crazy because that's what got me into food and fine dining. And 7 years later, here I am with Virgilio and the entire team doing this video. It's such a full circle moment for me and it's such a special experience. So without further ado, let's dive into the meal at Central.
The beginning is like, okay, you are here in Lima. Lima is just in front of the ocean, so you will experience the ocean of Peru. Razor clams, barnacles, codium, seaweed, sargassum. I think it's a quite complete presentation of different elements from the ocean.
So for the first dish, and I think there's going to be a theme, even though there's 13 courses, I feel like most of the courses are going to have a ton of different components, starting with this beautiful blue dish. I feel like my experience with Virgilio's cooking is he's one of the only chefs that I know that is able to use the color blue really well. We have 2 dishes in this spread that have the color blue. This one already right off the bat, you feel like you're hit with the ocean, you feel like you're hit with the sea. Wow, good start.
So the menu is structured as a map of Peru. We started on the coast, 10 meters below sea level, and now we're headed up to the dry valley, 900 meters above sea level.
Interesting array of ingredients. They use the squash here as like the plate. Underneath is bright orange and yellow. That's something that I can eat like non-stop. This one is just pure deliciousness. Wow. And here what they've done is they've literally taken a shrimp, dehydrated it and pressed it down. So it's like a fossilized shrimp. It reminds me of like one of the purest form of shrimp chips, which was a snack that I loved growing up.
And from the dry valley, we cross the mountains and drop down to the Amazon at 300 meters above sea level.
So basically everything here is coming from the Amazon. You're gonna see very different ingredients. This one, which is called yacon, you get the sweetness. So what we do is we do kind of a vegan yogurt and we do some dots and then we sweeten the whole mix with a bit of the sweetness coming from the same roots.
And that whole preparation is actually just the sauce for 2 dough balls, one made from the skin of awaje, this pine cone looking fruit, topped with hibiscus, and another made from the pulp, topped with Amazonian fish.
And then just in front of you, you have some Amazonian langoustines with 2 very thick sauces made with the head of the langoustine. and then with the Amazonian mint.
Lots of really interesting ingredients, and I think that's kind of the key for today, of just experiencing a lot of things that you just would not have anywhere other than Peru. Oh my God. That's like a great little pastry. I mean, that could honestly be a savory course or a dessert, depending on how you look at it. This is like a really, really good meal. I'm not gonna lie. And we're only, 3 courses in, and we've already had probably like 10 different dishes. So you're definitely getting an experience when you come here for sure. Every single one of the preparations is extremely elaborate.
Honestly, the meal at Central is really cerebral, and it might not be for everyone. They're introducing you to a ton of ingredients that you've never even heard of, and the reason that they can do this is because they actually started their own research arm called Mater with the goal of bringing these unique and unknown and underappreciated Peruvian ingredients into the restaurant.
We as Mater, we think of ourselves as an institution, not a physical one, but an institution of knowledge and of a methodology, applying this holistic view to everything that we are seeing. We have different departments. So we have the arts and culture, we have humanities, we have the academy or science, and we have the ideas and application in cooking.
Mater is sort of like the backbone that gives all of these other initiatives their structure. But the challenge of doing something this exploratory and ambitious is, how do you actually get that across to people? Their knowledge is encyclopedic, so they have these research catalogs for people to learn from right in Casa Tupac.
So here is a way in which we connect to different ecosystems of Peru. This is the Mater table, and every circle represents an ecosystem, and an ecosystem represents a wall. We can also identify the different materials that we can work with. It's not only the edibles, but also the vegetal fibers, the coloring agents. This is a project about preservation techniques, and it's something that you will see at meal. And I'm very excited that you're gonna do the full circuit, because it's gonna be interesting that you will be able to connect everything from here to Cusco, from Cusco to here.
Okay, Malena just mentioned Meal, which is their restaurant that's up in the mountains at 3,600 meters above sea level. This video is actually part 1 of 2 exploring the team's work here in Lima. But in part 2, we're actually gonna go to the mountains, experience Meal, and have one of the most unique dining experiences I've ever had in my entire life. So if you wanna see that video and more of the most amazing food around the world, make sure you subscribe below, because when we hit 1 million subscribers, I'm gonna be taking one of you to one of these incredible restaurants. But I think it's time to head back to dinner, and for this next course, we're actually also heading up to the mountains.
We are now reaching sort of the peak of this menu, not in terms of dish, but in terms of altitude. You're 4,200 meters above sea level, and it features some of these beautiful Peruvian courts. This first one is like a little salad almost, with these little, almost, they look like boba kind of spheres, but they're algae that you fetch them in the water at this super high altitude. So it starts off super floral and light, and then in the back you get this like pepperiness, this like little bit of spice.
Peru has such a diversity of corn, and the fact that it can grow at such a high altitude is a testament to Peru's biodiversity, with incredible products growing in literally every corner of the country. But for our next course, we plunge all the way back down to the sea at 15 meters below sea level. This dish was probably the most varied so far in terms of flavor and texture. You have a little bit of chew and lightness on the skewer, a more intense brininess from the lobster and the broth, and some bitterness from the different seaweeds. And after this course, we went back into the rainforest.
So here we continue with the Amazonia connection. We prepared this fish from the Amazonia River. The name of this fish is paiche, but it's also known as arapaima or pirarucu. It depends on the Amazonian region, they call it different. Here we prepared the belly, and now I'm gonna edit this foam that we made with the leaf of cassava. And the black one, we made it with the fermented cassava. And also here, I'm gonna prepare these green leaves with some fruit. And now I'm gonna edit this frozen fat of the bone of the paiche.
I loved this dish because the samples of ingredients that they bring alongside it are so gnarly. But for this next course, we wound up being perfectly at sea level.
So in this step, we use the catch of the day. We use scallops, we use shrimp, also sea urchin or uni. On top, the red paste, we had the cucumber and the beetroot juice.
We have a drink made from the liquid of the uni. Ooh, the spice on that is really nice. Kind of hits you in that like second wave. I mean, look at this spoon, by the way. What? Well, it's like a music note. How do I even use it?
Actually, every single one of their tableware pieces is so interesting, and it's for a good reason. They're made by local Peruvian artists and ceramicists, and with local Peruvian products. They even have a table outside that literally just showcases all of these beautiful wooden spoons.
This is made by a local artist, the name is Katawa, and he worked these pieces of art in the rainforest of Peru. They don't cut trees to make these pieces that you see here. The trees that naturally fall down to the river or to the ground, they use it and make the pieces that you can see here.
We actually got the chance to visit one of the ceramicists that they work with, who has one of the coolest studios I've ever seen. This studio is exactly what I imagine a true artist's studio to look like. They have clay and color samples everywhere, even on the ceiling. There are tons of different pieces and tight spaces, but it turns out that it's actually quite difficult to run a top ceramic studio in Peru.
Well, here in Peru, you don't have a lot of ceramic providers. So, for example, I know how to fix the kilns because there is no technical support that knows about ceramic kilns. So clay providers also are only one. Sometimes they have clay, sometimes they don't have clay.
And the inspiration for his pieces are really interesting as well, drawing heavy influences from nature.
A lot of them initially had to do with picking vegetables and fruits. Ceramic is like this piece with a lot of life will shrink and enter to the kiln, fire every organic matter. You'll have like a dead piece, but also a new one. So like death bringing a new piece. I always see ceramics as shaping rocks. I grew up in Bolivia, so a lot of the mountains, a lot of the rivers are on the shapes. So yes, a lot of rocks. I didn't know nothing about food, so they brought all those limits. Virgilio came and saw a piece that I have on the wall. He told me, can I break this piece? Yes. And I kind of, okay, you can break it. He broke it and used it as a plate. Yes, my mind was, wow, okay, you can create as much as you want, be free with a lot of the proposals.
By the way, these types of nature-inspired ceramics are exactly the type of ceramics that I love, so I actually had to go ahead and bring some of them home with me as well. I mean, just look at the color and the texture on these types of pieces. He really is a master. And in the next few courses at dinner, you can see more of his pieces, but here is where the presentation really starts to get crazy. This is a dish featuring the ecosystem of the octopus, with an octopus broth, some sea lettuce, and codium seaweed as well. But the next course had one of the wildest presentations of fish I've ever seen.
So here we continue with the Amazonian water. Name of this fish is a pacu. They are kind of the vegetarian piranha. So they usually lives in the Amazonian river near the tree, and then they are waiting until the fruits and nuts fall into the river. So between layers of lettuce, you can find the cured pacu. And then we made a sauce with Amazonian fruit. We finished with the shaved Amazonian nuts on the top. On the side, you can find the purple color of the potato that is called sachapapa. And on the top, you can see the black color of the string that is made with the juice of the sachapapa with the egg yolk.
Now you might have noticed in that last course that the dishes were served on books and papers. This is another really unique thing about Central. Throughout the experience, they give you all these different papers and books because they want to extend the learning experience beyond the course of that meal to really create this immersive experience. I mean, I got way more than just this, but this is an entire book, and this is a collection of all these different sort of diagrams, papers, things like that.
We're giving you information about what's going on in South America and Peru. How is our relationship with food? How is art and craft performing here? How are we creating one ecosystem here in our place in Central in Casa Tupac, also in Barranco, also going to Lima, also going to Cusco. In that way, we are pretty much like ambitious to say like, okay, we need to transcend what is happening in a restaurant.
And our last savory course was a perfect example of that philosophy. I won't talk too much about this savory course because we'll experience another version of it in the mountains next time, but it's a dish focused on pork and tubers, and it uses this concept of Andean cooking known as ahuatia.
We just had the most elaborate preparation of a potato ever. They bring out this entire spread of beautiful rocks, and within one of the rocks, there are two singular potatoes. This is meant to kind of cook it in the way that's cooked up in the Andes Mountains, where they kind of cook it within these stones to give it a little bit more flavor, a little bit of a creamy potato, but it's got some texture from that skin. There are something like over 3,000 different types of potatoes that you can find here in Peru. And like I said, it was the most elaborate presentation of a potato that I've ever seen in my life.
And as we headed into desserts, we kept exploring the Andes, moving to the Sacred Valley and Moray with dishes focused on fruitier and herbal flavors of cherimoya with Andean verbena and cabuya with muña leaf. But the dish that Central is most famous for is their final dessert. And before we dive more into the food, we actually got the chance to explore and go deeper into the research that the team has done on this particular ingredient through one of the experiences by Masi.
What we are going to do is to introduce you to the world of the Theobromas. We separate all the Theobromas in different structures, then we make raw materials out of each structure, and we share these raw materials with the projects that we have with Kjolle, with Central, with me.
In case you don't know what Theobromas are, it's the species of fruit that cacao is a part of. But what most people don't know is that there are actually other fruits similar to cacao that you can eat. And this experience is meant to share their knowledge on Theobromas in unique and interesting ways. The coolest part of it all is that you can literally eat every single part of the Theobroma. So that's exactly what we did.
It was at the outermost layer of
Yes,
the...
exactly.
It's almost like vegetal in
Yes.
a way. So these are like hanging on trees.
Exactly.
So we're really able to eat every single part of this.
And while we might be most familiar with cacao, there are other Theobromas that look wild, like copoaçu or macambo. And of course, we had to do some taste tests of those too.
It's really difficult to explain a flavor. It's a mix between a melon and a papaya.
Whoa. Wow, they're all so different from one another. That's crazy.
Exactly.
Their jobs are literally just to do research on Theobromas, how to process it, use it in different foods and applications, and they were even teaching us about the geography of where these come from in Peru. But of course, we had to finish by actually trying some finished products.
Entonces, habrán probado, por ejemplo, en grano crudo, en grano en nips tostado, han probado chocolate de la máquina o en estado líquido, y ahora vamos a probar después de que la barra está cristalizado, cómo queda.
And before we left, we got to take our own chocolate bars that we made with us.
Really signing our own chocolate bars. This is crazy.
So in case you haven't noticed it, the final dessert at Central is focused on Theobromas.
Having this deconstruction of cacao is quite an amazing move. You get to see all these different parts of the cacao. We call it endocarpo, exocarpo, the vena, and also all the fruit, the pulp. We're pointing that how far you can go with cacao. The understanding of cacao is not chocolate, it's the fruits. And when you go to the cacao farms, you get to see how much waste we have on cacao. To make chocolate, we're using about 15% of the whole fruit. 85% of the cacao is probably waste. We're getting the cacao from the Amazon, and then we're using 100% of the fruit.
So we've got this paste and these little crackers or wafers. Really deep, rich, a little bit bitter at the end. Got a drink. That's like the polar opposite. It's light, it's fruity, it's refreshing. This is honestly like a Peruvian version of a kid in a candy shop because I'm just like trying all these different little things here. The fact that they're able to do all these different things with cacao just shows the versatility, the flexibility, and how important this ingredient really is. I mean, this has been a phenomenal meal. If you haven't been convinced that Central is the best of Peruvian food, showing across every single ecosystem that the country has to offer, then I don't know what to tell you. It's great getting to see Central 7 years after I came here for the first time, my first ever fine dining restaurant, and now getting to hang out with Virgilio, getting to explore, go deeper into what Central and Mater are doing here in the city is just super special experience.
So we've experienced Central and Mater, we've talked to Virgilio and Malena, but we are not done yet. Their newest restaurant, the up-and-comer, the one that's taking the world by storm, was started by the third person in this trifecta, and that is Pia Leon. She started at Central, and as she grew as a chef and as a person, she wound up opening her own place, Kjolle, here in Casa Tupac, which was recently ranked the number 16 restaurant in the world. And if Central is cerebral, Kjolle is the opposite of that. It's fun and chaotic in the best way possible.
Yeah, you know, we have these three concepts. That is Central, that is always talking about the biodiversity and territory of Peru. Meal, that only focus in that altitude, you know, really high. And in Kjolle, I think represents how I am. So I don't have that limit. The principal idea is to show all biodiversity. You can see ingredients from the coast, from the Andes, from the Amazon in one moment.
You all know that I absolutely love bread, and it is a beautiful one. So this bread is made out of maca, which is a root. You get this butter that, and this looks like it's melded into the stone, and you get this chili herbal dressing that they use for the watia, which is this technique that we saw at Central that they tried to kind of replicate of cooking the potatoes in the earth. It's one of the most unique breads I've ever had. The maca makes that bread a little bit more dense, a little bit chewier, but with the butter, with the condiments, it keeps it creamy, but also a little bit sweet and a little bit herbal, which is nice.
This was followed up by a dish that really starts to exemplify the philosophy of Kjolle.
This is the second course, and we're already seeing how all these different ecosystems in Peru are starting to come together. We have lulo, we have sweet potatoes, we have seafood, kind of all thrown together at the same time with a little bit of quinoa as well. It's so light, it's so fresh, the citric flavor of the lulo comes through really nicely. You get a little bit of pepperiness in there as well, and then the quinoa adds this beautiful little crunch. Just a really light, bright, and refreshing sort of course. I mean, this has been a great start already.
And before we got to their most famous dish, we had a super unique pairing of flavors for our next course.
The Madre de Dios nut is from the Amazon. We've used this for the leche de tigre. The duck we've cured in Amazonian citrus, and on top we have sea urchin.
Now, before we keep going at Kjolle, I do have to point out that the reason that all of these projects work so well is really down to their team. And I wanted to share this specifically because I've filmed at a lot of restaurants around the world, but I've never experienced the level of hospitality that I experienced here in Peru. Not only did they put together an entire 10-day itinerary across Peru for me, but even for the places that weren't one of their projects, they always had someone from their team come and dine with me. Sang, who we saw earlier, actually took us to an anticucho spot with massive portions, which was an incredibly fun time.
You eat the whole thing?
I ate the whole thing.
Holy, how did you eat it?
Other team members took us to iconic places like La Mar, one of the temples of seafood here in Lima, which was one of the most filling meals I've ever had, and La Picanteria for even more incredible seafood. The people across Central, Kjolle, and Mater are so warm and inviting that it just becomes easy to fall in love with the country and the food. Like I mentioned, next time we're going to be going up to the mountains to dive deeper into the people and the culture, so make sure to subscribe to see that. But for now, I think it's time to try Kjolle's most famous dish.
You will see all that tubers and roots from the Andes. You will see many types of potatoes, of roots, many colors. This dish was the only one that starts at the beginning of the menu 6 years ago, but I think is one of the most important dish about the Andes of Peru.
This next dish is pretty much a representation of Kjolle versus Central. At Central, we had a tuber dish, and it was all about simplicity. This one is called many tubers, and it shows the range of what a tuber can offer. Lots of pops of colors, lots of pops of textures. You get some creaminess, some crunchiness, something that's a little bit more tart, when it's a little bit more sweet, you get a really nice smokiness. Absolutely delicious.
Kjolle really does feel almost like the anti-Central. You can very clearly tell that they have a similar philosophy and approach to ingredients and food, but Pia's voice comes through so clearly in this menu. There's an energy and explosiveness to it that feels very her, and as we headed into the final savory dish of the night, that difference continued to come through.
This is another difference between Central and Kjolle. At Central, you don't really get a final savory meat dish. Here, you finish with this beautifully tender, slow cooked short rib. They don't even give you a knife because you don't need a knife to cut through this thing. It's so tender, it so melts in your mouth. It's got a little bit of that pepperiness, a little bit of that spice in the beef. That is a very different way of ending the savory parts of the meal compared to what we had before. Can't complain.
By this point, the drinks were stacking up. Across both Central and Kjolle, their non-alcoholic drinks continue to reflect that Peruvian biodiversity, and even some drinks that were made out of clay. And to finish off the meal, we got a beautiful starting dessert of mashua, which is a type of tuber melded with pitaya, and there's no better way to end our time here in Lima than with Theobromas.
Very different from the one at Central. The one at Central was sort of overwhelming in the best way possible with 10 different preparations. Here, we keep it pretty simple, and by now, we should be experts in all these different Theobromas. I immediately know that that one is copoasu. It has that acidic, citric sort of flavor, these little noodle-like bits, and this one's really smooth and creamy. And then finally, we have this beautiful display with a mixture of macambo and cacao. Absolutely incredible experience. Amazing.
Central, Mater, Kjolle, and everyone involved is truly trying to change the world, and I think Malena says it best when talking about their purpose and their ambition.
We may have a lot of the solutions for global problems. Latin American thinking can have a lot to give. If we could gather the stuff from the past that actually worked and we can bring it to the moment that we are living in, we can be the solution for the future. Solution to the effects of climate change, solutions to growing stuff without disrupting the balance of the forest. We can actually face these possibilities because we have all the ecosystems to support these ideas.
But this is just the beginning, because next up, we're going up the mountains to have quite possibly the most unique fine dining experience I've ever had in my entire life. And I can't wait to take you with me.